Well, hello, everybody. Hello, hello, hello. Thank you very much for joining us, wherever you are joining us from. We're so glad for your company. Just to introduce myself, my name's Duncan Banks, and I'm the director of the Further Faster network of churches in the UK and Ireland. And we work in partnership with our great friends at North Point Community Church. And this is the Bricks or Clicks webinar. And I'm really grateful that you're joining us. Lots of people still jumping on board. And I'm grateful that you're here because you're continuing to respond to this COVID crisis. And to be honest, as a leader over the years, I've discovered that crisis always bumps great leaders, always bumps successful leaders from their comfort zone. And maybe some of us would say we've been in our comfort zone, but crisis bumps great leaders from their comfort zone to their creative zone. And you're going to need to get incredibly creative as you start to think about your church post lockdown. I mean, is it going to be a bricks church? You're going to go back to how it was? Or is it going to be a clicks church? Is it going to be online, offline? Is it going to be physical, or is it going to be digital? Or as James Emery White calls it, a phygital church, you know, part physical, part digital. Such an important discussion for the church right now. In fact, I spoke to a leader recently who I've been coaching for quite a number of months before the pandemic hit. And he just said to me in an offhand comment, he said, "Duncan, I can't wait to get back to normal." And I thought to myself, I'm not sure I want to go back to normal. You know, as a leader, I want better than normal. And I remember the conversations I had with him. Normal wasn't great for his church. You know, they were tanking with numbers. They were struggling to raise budget. Their kids were coming maybe once a month, not once a week. They were struggling with staffing issues. And I said to him, is that the normal you want to get back to? You know, now is a fantastic time. If there's any positive from this crisis, now is a fantastic time to start rethinking everything about how and why we do church. So lots of people jumping on. It's great numbers. So in fact, if you are just jumping on, I'd love to know where you're listening from. I know there are people from right around the globe that are listening. So stop by the chat section and just say hi and tell us where you're listening from so we get a bit of a clue of where people are from. I'd love that. So this is episode 2 of a 2-part webinar series that we've been doing over these past couple of weeks. And if you want to replay episode 1, which featured Lane Jones and Jeff Henderson, or if you want to share it, then it's available on our YouTube channel. And Matt's going to put that in the chat so you can get straight to that. And if you go to our YouTube channel, do me a favor and subscribe. It really does help us out. But let me go right ahead and introduce our guests today. Both are from North Point Community Church in Atlanta. We'll start with Lane. Hey, Lane, thanks again for joining us. Last week, you were joining us from Florida. Are you still there or are you home now?
I am back in Atlanta, just outside of Atlanta. So vacation is over.
Oh, back to
Zoom. Holiday is over. Yeah,
Holiday's
back to Zoom
over. Okay.
Yeah.
Well, it's good to have you, Lane. We're really glad that you're
here. Great to be here.
And our other guest is Gavin Adams. And Gavin, am I right in thinking that you actually, crazy as it sounds, you actually moved house during lockdown? Am I right in thinking that?
We did. What's crazier is someone bought our house during lockdown and signed a contract. And so we did. We moved less than a month ago, or right at a month ago.
Wow. And how's the new place?
It's wonderful. Our church is in Woodstock, which is Northwest Atlanta. And we moved to a house where I'm less than a mile from the church now. So
fantastic. And your role there yesterday. Okay, great. And tell us what your role is at North Point and your history with church.
Oh, sure. Yeah. So I'm the lead pastor at Woodstock City, one of our locations. My history of the church, I grew up in the church, but spent the majority of my earlier years, college years, business school years, thinking about being a marketplace guy. And I did that for about a decade before I transitioned into church. I certainly never saw myself doing this as a career, but as I fell more in love with what the local church was doing, I just felt God leading me step by step further into that. So at some point when I became, an elder and the only step left was to be a part-time, staff member, I knew I had to continue taking steps, which eventually led me to where I am now, working for Lane. So
fantastic. Lane's your boss, huh? Okay.
He is my boss. Yeah. Yeah. I want to do a really good job on this call for you, Duncan. So Lane's the best boss. Lane's the best boss you can have. He's fantastic.
Good. We all have one boss.
We do all have one boss. Yes.
Yeah. And I know
we're talking about Jesus.
Yeah. Not Andy. Yeah. So at any point, if you've got any questions for Gav or for Lane, or any comments you want to make, please drop them in the chat. Matt is keeping an eye on the chat for us, grateful for that. And just to say that when we come to the end of what we're talking about after about an hour or so, I want to give you something special, an offer to come and just hang with your team. So hang around for that, and I'll tell you how you can do that. So here's the learning outcome for you educationalists out there. By the end of this hour together, you're going to come away with two things. The first thing, you're going to come away with an understanding of the kind of things that you need to retire after lockdown, stuff that you had been doing and doesn't seem quite so relevant anymore. And the second thing you're going to learn is what kind of things should you retain? What have you learned in this new season that you're thinking, man, this has been gold dust. We need to hang on to this for dear life. So we'll learn those two things as we go through together. So let's dive in. Lane, last week, for those of us who were here last week, you talked about 3 questions North Point are using right now amongst your staff to talk about what church looks like after lockdown. Can you remind us of those 3 questions?
Yeah, I will. But before I do, I just want to point out, Gavin, Susan from Barrow Valley, let's see, we're going to get it right. Barrow Valley Community Church in Carlow, Ireland, one up to you. They bought their church building during lockdown.
Way to go, Susan. That's
So there you go. So
that's nothing. Yeah.
That's overachieving. Way to go.
Yeah.
Way to go, Ireland. Yeah. So we as you said, Duncan, we don't want to let this opportunity go to waste. And that seems like a crazy thing to say because nobody would have chosen this, but since it's here, let's figure out how to leverage it. So we just decided to use this period to really just go back and think of 3 words: rethink, retire, and retain. What do we need to rethink that we've always thought or with the way we've always done it? Once we've done that, are there some things we need to retire, just stop doing? And then what do we need to retain? And maybe change a little bit. And Gavin's going to talk a little bit about that in a minute, but those are really our 3 big buckets. But we also, and one of the things I talked about last week, we went into it and Andy kind of gave us not really a caution, but just a parameters to think around this thing and just really to ask ourselves, what is it we're willing to give up to move forward? So that's kind of the retire thing. But ultimately, what is moving forward? You know, if in these seasons you can start making some, decisions based on the past and what has worked, what hasn't worked, that kind of thing. But it's always important to know what you're heading towards. So what is the goal? What is the win? What is it you're trying to achieve? And that should guide, all of these decisions on, rethinking, retiring, and retaining. So, what is moving forward? And then ultimately to make sure you answer the question for your church, what is core? Because you don't want to mess with the core. What is that thing, not only that really connects the people, to your church and makes it effective, but what is the thing that drives you, that connects you, that is like, boy, if you changed that, I don't know that I would even want to be here and do what we're doing. And most of those things for most of us are macro level mission, vision, value type things. But, every now and then you're going to bump into something that it's like, wow, that program or that, process, that's core, that's vital. So, you just don't want to mess with those things. So that's sort of the framework under which we sort of had the whole conversation.
Thanks, Lane. That's really helpful. And that question about what's core, we could stop the webinar now and we would have learned something golden. Honestly, if you're listening to this, you go back into your church leadership teams and just ask that question. Spend an hour together saying, what is core about us? It would clarify so much. And if you're getting 7 or 8 different answers, then I think you've got a clarity problem in the leadership team. So going back and finding that answer is so, so important. So all of us want to know, Lane, because lots of churches around the world look at North Point and, you're at the kind of one of the highest levels of leadership there in the church. You've been there since day one. So lots of churches look to you. Get us on the inside here. What are the things that you are as a church considering retiring? Things that you were doing and thought, wow, I'm not so sure that's irrelevant anymore.
Well, and I like the term you use, considering retiring, because this is a process we've just begun. And one of the ways that we're structured is that we are 6 churches in the Atlanta area, and we have a couple of partner churches that connect with us as well. And there are some things that we do in lockstep and some things that we will potentially all retire. But also, all of our churches are unique in many ways, and they run different programs, do things a little differently. So some of them will be retiring things that others, don't even have to retire. So I'll let Gavin talk about a little bit of that too, because Gavin is kind of frontline on the ground at, one of our largest campuses, and and they're really wrestling through, a lot of this on a micro level as opposed to a macro level. But I'll just give you some of the thinking that went into a lot of the conversations on retiring, or the way we always sort of look at it. And we have a highly evaluative culture anyway. And, we retire things quite often. So this isn't a first pass, for us. So every year we kind of look at everything. But I would tell you to ask some of these questions during this season. What have you been relieved not to have had to do? In other words, what is it that you've just been like, the best thing about this is I haven't had to, and fill in the blank. Because whatever you put in that blank is something that you're having to manufacture energy to do. You're having to figure. Now there are some things we all have to manufacture energy in. That's just part of working. But if there's that program, if there's that thing that it's just like, gosh, this is just always a drain, that may be something you should consider retiring, because it's having more than whatever effect it's having on your mission. That's one thing, but it's having a detrimental effect on you. The second thing I would say is to take this time to really look and say, what isn't really strategic? It's just a habit. It's just something we've habitually done for years and years and years. Because one of the things that is really amazing about this time is everything you read says it takes about 90 days to create a habit. And so basically none of our attendees are in the habit of doing anything they were doing when this started. So nobody's in the habit of going to church. Nobody's in the habit of whatever it is. So, those habits are broken. And so now you have a chance to retrain some new habits. So if you've been doing anything just out of habit, you want to reimagine that. And then to me, the most impactful thing is what is it you've discovered that you are really, really pumped and psyched about? You can't wait to get back and do this, or do, institute something or retain something or launch something new. Consider everything in light of that, because ultimately you're going to have to stop doing something, if you're as busy as we are, to start this new thing. And so if you're able to look at those things compared to one another, it will help you endure the pain of retiring something, because you're retiring something in light of something better, not, just killing something. And that kind of vision will really help people engage in and buy that. So anyway, those are just sort of three of the ideas, or three of the frameworks that went into some of our thinking on that. But like I said, I can go ahead and talk about a few things that have popped up at the macro level. I'll let Gavin talk about some of the micro level things. But one of the things that I've heard across all campuses is just the idea of live trainings. That this technology and video technology and the ability to communicate with everybody digitally, as opposed to just who can make it into the building for a training. I'll be surprised in the future if we do any. Now we'll do gatherings, but they'll be more for encouragement and celebration and that. But as far as just the basic, here's how we train a volunteer, here's how we train, staff, maybe even. I feel like we'll do that digitally. We'll do that video. We'll sort of shift to that. We're going to retire definitely some in-person meetings, and really have the person face-to-face meetings for those things that require face-to-face. One of the things I've heard a lot of conversation about is retiring our what I'm just calling single direction communication. That so much of our communication to our really our audience, our people, has been just us piping it out, sending out. Is what we've now realized is that, gosh, there's so many new ways of hearing back from people and of engaging in conversation digitally. I think we're going to retire that. Now, granted, yeah, a lot of it'll still be broadcast, but we're going to try to have more conversations and connections even digitally than we have in the past. And then the last thing that I wrote down, and this is probably more of a rethink thing than necessarily a retire thing, but I think we've been, I don't want to say amazed by, but almost impressed by the willingness of our people to accept maybe a little lower excellence, you know, of quality for timeliness and for authenticity. And so, I mean, we're an excellence culture, you know, no doubt about that. But, you know, the ability to, you know, hold up, you know, one of these things and capture a video and get it out to people right away and send those words out has really been, it's been very powerful. And it's not something we would have done. I mean, you know, we're a little bit more like 2-camera, you know, light kit, you know, shoots, and we're, you know, so I do like the fact that we're in some ways retiring that, but let's face it, it'll never go away. So anyway, I just feel like I just spewed out a lot of stuff. So
no, that is super, super helpful, Lane. And I love that first question you started with, that idea of where are you having to manufacture energy? Because I think every leader knows what it's like to go, oh, not that meeting again. Not that,
yeah.
oh, you know, and maybe it's time to rethink, to even retire some of those things. I'd be
Right.
really interested in the chat, for those of you who are involved with churches, what kind of things are you thinking about retiring? What conversations have you had so far? What thoughts have been running through your mind? I talked to one leader recently, and they were thinking they were doing 2 or 3 different services in 2 or 3 different styles. You know, one was for an older generation, one was for a millennials generation, one was for families. And they were thinking, do you know what? All the energy and effort to do 3 different styles, maybe we should retire that and just do one style and be who we are. So I'm interested just to know, you know, Martin's put evening service down. That's interesting, you know. Be just interesting to see what kind of things you're thinking about. Gavin, just building on from what Lane says, we'll get to I'm interested to know what you're thinking in terms of Woodstock, in terms of what you're retiring. But before that, tell us a bit about, as a lead pastor, how are you taking your staff and your volunteers and your people through the idea of considering what life after lockdown for Woodstock will look like? What's the framework you've been using?
Well, the framework that we've been using is leveraging as many conversations as we can so that people feel as informed as they can.
Great.
One of the hardest things about the pandemic for us at the local church has been just the lack of physical presence that enables organic kind of communication to happen, right? It's that corridor conversations that we're just not having now. And so in the first couple of weeks, we realized there were a lot of decisions being made, and we could not rely any longer on the previous channels of communication to ensure everything got communicated, right? So we immediately had to shift into having weekly staff meetings on Zoom. We had to shift into having actually more meetings than we were having pre-pandemic, because we needed more time digitally face-to-face, right, to ensure that we were all working off the same playbook and we were all thinking the same way. So when we begin to think about re-entry plans, it's been a lot of that. It's been an increase in conversations, all for the most part digital, but an increase in conversations to make sure, well, one, that we're getting the best ideas to the table, because I'm not smart enough to come up with that. And so we need our staff all thinking about it. We need their collective brain power and really their diversity of personalities, right? My personality is the one who's gonna like drive forward in the face of whatever. There is no obstacle we can't overcome. But I've got some brilliant staff members who are a little bit more, you know, wary. I need that voice at the table, because that kind of diversity of personality creates better decisions. And so it's taken a little longer, but we've had a lot more conversations. And so I would say the framework, Duncan, at a high level, has been lots of information that we've tried to synthesize into our decision-making, at the same time overly communicating back with our staff and with our volunteers with everything that we know. The hard part is that in a season like this, I mean, it's unprecedented, right? So we don't even know how to lead through this well yet. We're learning as we go. But the hardest part for me as a leader has been not being able to provide certainty. because things, especially at the beginning, changed daily, in some cases hourly. And so trying to announce a reopening date is impossible because you just don't know. And so we talk, I mean, Andy says this constantly to us, right? We're always trying to figure out how to provide clarity even when we can't provide certainty. And so we use those two words a lot in our staff meetings and our leadership team meetings. Here's what we're certain of, which has been a very small bucket. Here's what's going to be clear for us now, though. And so separating certainty and clarity has been a really helpful framework in those conversations.
That's great. Separating clarity and certainty. I mean, the one thing you can be certain of is that it's uncertain, but at least you can be clear about that. Yeah,
and being honest about that, and being very clear. This is what we're thinking, right? Clarity, but it's not what we're certain of. And so creating that separation, a lot of over communication of that separation has been helpful.
So just going back to where Lane was, Gavin, that's helpful. Thank you. What are you thinking about in terms of retiring? What are you thinking about putting to one side?
So the retire, I'm going to talk about retain in a minute. The retire and retain, a lot of those things kind of go together, right? They're kind of linked at the hip at times. So some of the things that Lane said is exactly what our team locally has been talking about and what Lane, been talking about at the more, North Point Ministries level. I think we definitely want to retire at Woodstock City things that feel like a monologue. And I saw somebody in the chat, I think Chris earlier asked a question, how do you kind of move into that more two-way communication? So I'll talk more about this in a minute, but leveraging things like Facebook Live has been an incredible opportunity for us at the local church. We did a night of worship. It was a Facebook Live. We did Good Friday as a Facebook Live. In the midst of all the racial unrest that we're experiencing in our country, 2 weeks ago, we pulled together a group of men of color who were very good friends of mine and had an hour, very honest and frank dialogue with our church. And we had, over the course of the next week, 1,000 people watch it. No, I'm sorry, 1,100 people watch it. So 11,000 people. No, hold on. Yeah, 11,000. My fault. 11,000 people watch it. We're doing another one tomorrow night. Wow. So it's given us an opportunity to have immediate connection with people. And we weren't doing any of those things in the past. Almost everything we did was a monologue, except for a small group. But almost everything else was monologue. So we're thinking right now, we have to retire that thinking. We've got to figure out. So, but we've done that. We'll talk more about that in retain. I think we're also going to retire binary thinking. In the past, I have thought, because it isn't like we weren't doing digital in the past. I mean, not on this level, but we had social media. I mean, we had a stream of our service up on Sunday. I mean, all of that was happening pre-pandemic, but I think we thought of everything as either being physical or digital. And I think that that binary thinking is something we've got to retire. We've got to start thinking more about integrating it and it not being either or. So to Lane's point, volunteer trainings don't have to be physical. They also don't have to be digital. They can be both all the time. We had a meeting yesterday where 3 of us were in the building and 6 of us weren't. It didn't have to be either or. It was binary. It wasn't binary. And so I think we're working to figure out how to incorporate that. Last thing Lane mentioned, and I love this, we're working hard on this. We do have a very high excellence kind of quota that we're trying to hit. I think we've realized that the vulnerability, the authenticity, and really immediacy is something that we need to be better at. So we have to retire waiting for Sunday to talk about things. I think we have to retire having 2 cameras, a full light kit, a mic, all the things to make it look hyper professional, because I do think polished sometimes pushes out personal, and we need to ramp up personal. And if it means that we have to tone down polished to do it, that's probably a good move, and we need to retire that.
Wow. Gavin, that's super helpful. I appreciate that. Leaders ask great questions. That's the hallmark of a great leader. And one of my friends, Leon, has got a great question around this whole retiring thing. So I'm going to see if I can just get him onto the panel to ask that question live to you, because I know it's a question that him and myself have talked about for a while. So let's get him on. Hey, Leon.
Hi guys.
Hey, Leon.
Where are you coming from?
Yeah, from Halesowen, just outside Birmingham. So this is so good, guys. Thank you so much for this input. Yeah, my question is, in terms of retiring things and picking up, Gavin, your point about certainty and lack of certainty, can we retire things too early? How do we avoid knee-jerk retiring? You know, are we going to regret? And I know the answer might be yes, we might, but are we going to regret retiring things? And how do we navigate the tension of timing when there is so little certainty?
Lane?
Well, I'll take a shot at that. I think about it kind of like with those volunteers or those staff members that when they walk up to you and say, hey, I don't know how to tell you this, but I'm leaving. And inside you're jumping up and down. And on the outside, you're trying to be like, oh, I hate that.
I know what you mean.
So I would say I wouldn't retire anything that you've just thought about retiring in the moment, in this
Right.
moment. I would say be very careful to go, you know what, we could, shove off the cliff, is this whole thing. Because, I think you're right, Leon, that could be in the moment, response that when the moment changes, you're like, wow, that was, so I would definitely lean into those things that have always, or at least for a season leading into this, have been, if I could find a way, to stop that, I would, and then I would, I think that's very wise. I would be wary to stop or to retire something just based on what you've experienced right now.
That's
the way I would look at it.
Leon, we've been saying this kind of internally, and it sounds a little crass, I think, at first, but you never want to not take advantage of a good pandemic. And to Lane's point, when there's something that is a drain emotionally, on you, you love to get rid of those things. The problem is that here comes Sunday, here comes Sunday, here comes Sunday. And so this 7-day cycle makes it very difficult to quit doing things that you've become at least habitualized to do, or your church attendees are used to doing. And by the way, there are some people who love the things that you don't. So trying to change something in the middle of normalcy is very difficult because transitions are very difficult. Right now, we do have this incredible opportunity, in a weird way, to transition things without the pain of the transition. So when people come back to the building, when they come back to whatever the new version of normal is, it's going to be a new version of normal. And I think the expectation will be we're setting brand new expectations. So to Lane's point, I mean, it's funny. Some of our staff, I have felt this. I love Sunday. It's my favorite day of the week. Sunday mornings are so much fun, but I've also enjoyed sleeping in on Sunday some. And I've also enjoyed the not having as much pressure on Sunday morning, right? So if I just sat in the pandemic only and said, what are the things that I'm like really refreshed by not doing, I could accidentally cancel Sunday morning, right? So Lane's point is so wise to not make decisions in the moment because the emotions lie in the moment, right? But we all have things that in January or December we were thinking, oh shoot, I don't want to do that again, So now is the perfect time to come back to those and probably get rid of them.
Thank you.
Gavin, I want to pick up with you about Sunday morning in a minute, but before we let Leon go, Russ has put in the chat here, it doesn't seem many people are willing to put in the chat the things they're thinking of retiring. Is that because they're scared or embarrassed, or because they're too concerned about the cost of retiring some of the things they want to get rid of? So, I promise you I won't tell anybody, Leon, but what's in your mind in terms of things you're thinking about retiring?
Very similar to what the guy said in terms of the binary thinking, what Gavin said, that was so helpful. So we're going to try and retire that. There are some specific things like we were giving out weekly bulletin sheets and all that. So little things like that, which to be honest have become big things for us in normal times, but actually now it'll be easy to retire that. So just things like that drain up a little bit of resources and are very old school thinking. So things like that. There are some bigger community and bigger projects that we've been investing in a long time, which we have been thinking about retiring. It's a painful conversation, but it's just picking up Lane's point. It's not just a COVID conversation, it's a pre-COVID conversation. And if we are going to grasp the nettle, now is the season to do it. So that's kind of where we are.
And just before you go again, Leon, sorry, whenever you talk, you raise more questions for me, which is great. But you know, these guys are thinking sort of 9th of August, they're going back into their buildings. That's probably not true for us in the UK. So how do you see, how Life Central Church in Halesowen, how are you thinking about re-entry?
For us, we're trying to resist the rush back to our buildings and the rush back to our busyness. And that's really hard for me because that's how I'm wired. But so we're thinking groups, clusters, gatherings, and we want to make sure that we're testing things out. We want the experience when people come back to the physical to be better than it was on digital, or at least comparable. If it's not, you know, why would we want to rush back? So that's how we're seeing it.
Great. Thanks, Leon. Appreciate your time. Thank you. We'll let you go. I appreciate that. Gavin, just...
Duncan, could I just say, I noticed something else Russ put in the chat that I think is critical on this whole retiring thing. When, you know, he said the idea that won't people be desperate for something familiar, or mightn't people be desperate for something familiar? And I think that is very true. And one of the cautions that Andy talked about in our meeting where we started looking at this is we always have to remember that our church, our model, the way we've done what we've done has, you know, is perfectly designed to attract and retain the people who are currently in our places, you know. So when we start messing with that, you know, we're going to be messing with their church. So we don't want to innovate our way out of, you know, their church. Now, at some level, we have to do that to make, you know, changes, but to have that balance in mind of, is this strategic? Is this moving us forward with the vision? Or is this just something I don't like, but that other people really resonate with? You gotta balance, you know, those things out, because, you know, you don't want people to come back and not recognize, you know, your church. You know, they are going to want familiar. They are going to want those things. So it's a very, you know, delicate dance, you know, to do, but it's a great point, Russ.
Lane, we get bored with stuff so much faster than the attender.
Yeah, because we do it every week. They do it, you know, maybe 2 weeks a month, or maybe 1 week a month, you know. So,
I mean, I've always said to churches that I've been talking with that whenever we're redesigning church for whatever this new normal is, don't set it in stone right from the off. You know, say to people, we're going to try this for the next month or 3 months or 6 months. And we probably will shift again, like we've shifted since we've come from being physical to being digital. We shifted in the weeks. We went from just trying to replicate church to actually trying to be more of a YouTube church. And we'll probably do the same when we go back in our building. So don't make a change and set it in stone. I think that's quite useful. One of the things that's been put in the chat, which I love, I'm trying to find it now. I think it was, who was it? It was Julian. What a great thing. He said the 40-minute sermon is gone. And, you know, your boss, and this time I am talking about Andy and not Jesus, he's famous for the 40-minute sermon. So I'm just wondering, Gavin, when you get back on August the 9th...
He would say the 35-minute sermon, so I'll cover his back here.
Okay,
our joke is that it's time with prayer or without prayer. So, yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah. So, So what do you think in August the 9th would look like? How are your physical, I mean, what's the tone of that first meeting? What do you think?
Well, one thing we know for sure is we want the tone of it to be celebratory, not fearful. And so we don't want to open too quickly. I mean, you mentioned we're targeting August the 9th, but Lane, I think we would say we're 50-50 on that date right now, because it's only June and there's still things happening here in the States, and things are evolving and changing. And our school system, July the 1st, is going to make some decisions on what that looks like for, you know, school in August. We go back August 1st or so here. And so we're kind of holding that loosely because we don't really know. The one thing we do know is we don't want to rush people back to the building to experience something that isn't us. And our model of ministry is not built with social distancing. So in mind, it's in fact a lot of the opposite of that. And so we don't want to come back until we can come back as us. And I also think it sends this is just an opinion, but I think it might send the wrong message to our church community and broader community if we rush back, because it's almost like we're communicating that you have to be in the church building to be connected to your faith and be connected to your Heavenly Father. And I don't want people to think that the building is the pathway to their faith, that you don't need that. And so I think when I see churches rushing to get back, it makes me wonder if we're doing it with the right motivations and if we're sending a wrong message in the process. So we're kind of holding that date loosely because we want to come back and it be more of a celebration that we're back. Now, specifically around, we have about a 1 hour service. I think we are thinking that 1 hour is going to look a little differently. And the bigger reason, again, the pandemic didn't just highlight new things. It really highlighted things that we knew were happening, and now we were forced to pay attention to it. So it isn't like we didn't know that a shorter sermon might be more beneficial in the future of the church, right? That we've been talking about that for years. The pandemic has proven some things that we had to think about, that because on the Here Comes Sunday every 7 days, you can not think about things very easily. So I think that, and Lane, correct me if you think this is not exactly, accurate, but I think that our conversations have been, we have to make sure that the physical service is worth attending for people to sit in the traffic, the parking lot, get up, get dressed, get their kids up, all those things. Because if the physical service is built around something that you can get digitally, why would you come and get it physically? So if it's a content-driven experience, I can get content anywhere. I don't need to come to church for that. So it has to be about something that is more than what could be digested digitally. So we're talking about how do we make it more about the experience? How do we make it more personal? How do we make it more connecting? I don't have all the answers for that quite yet. I do know that as we move into this new thing, all of those elements have to be elevated to make it worth showing up for.
Yeah. Gavin, that's really helpful, my friend. I want us to move into the retaining side and park the retiring side for a moment. Retire the retiring side, because I think we've done a lot on that. But just before we do, a question that's come up from Andy, and it comes up all the time on calls with pastors, is, we've kind of figured out how to do ministry online to adults, and we reckon we'll be okay with doing both physical and digital to adults. But how on earth do you do that to an 8-year-old? How do we do family ministry to kids and teens in this new reality? What are you thinking of?
That's on my retain list.
Okay, well, let's go into that then. Go ahead.
We've been talking about that for a long time at North Point. How do we, broaden our digital footprint to include children and students? And then when the pandemic hits, you realize you have no choice. You have to. And so within a span of a week or two, we shifted everything digitally and began creating digital experiences for preschool children, for elementary, for middle school, for high school. And so I think what we have learned is that we need to retain that in the new normal that's coming for us. I think the fear has always been, and it's not an unfounded fear, is that if you give people everything digitally, why would they come physically, right? And it's a little bit of a scarcity mentality, but I don't mean it that negatively, because I think it's a real valid fear and a valid concern, because what we do know is that the physical experience, especially for children, the physical experience is always better than the digital experience. And so, and at least in the way that we do, church, where it's small group driven, it's relational driven, it's connection, and you can't do that digitally to the level. You can do some of it, but it's just 50% there. So I think the fear is if we provide digital content to children, to families, to students, it gives them an even better excuse to not show up physically. And we know physical is important. I think what we're learning is that by offering digital content, it doesn't encourage them to stay home more. I think by them being more connected to us, it increases the likelihood of them wanting to come and be more connected to us. So if you think about, a musician or a band, if they just have a concert and it's the only way you can see them is physically at the concert, you might go. But if they offer their music to you and you fall in love with it and engage with it weekly, daily, and then they show up in concert, the odds of you wanting to go, they go up dramatically. So again, it's not a perfect illustration, or metaphor, but I think there's some similarity. So I think that instead of being afraid, I think that we can provide weekly digital content on Sundays for children and students that will allow them to stay connected with us when they're not in the building, which will then hopefully drive their desire to be in the building the next Sunday.
I love that idea. It's creating a hunger, isn't it?
Yes.
To keep connecting with them digitally so
Yep.
that you're creating a hunger to be back in the room.
Because when you get disconnected, you feel disconnected, and the odds of you wanting to reconnect go down. I mean, the very first time I took a 2-week vacation, I'd never done that before. I took a 2-week vacation, and halfway through the week, I realized I wasn't thinking about church. And I thought, this is what everybody thinks. They're like, this is what normal people think. I think about church all day. It's my job. Most people think about it on Saturday night. And so if we allow them to get out of the habit of engaging with the church, they're going to disengage with the church. So let's deeper the engagement with them. And
so
perfect way.
Yes. So being really practical and granular here, Gavin,
Yep.
what have you been doing with your children, your kids and your students to keep them connected?
Yeah, well, we have launched digital experiences for preschool, elementary, middle, junior high, high school, and college. That's been music, host, Bible story, some of the things that we would do in our normal environment. We've tried to make it digital. However, we also had to move it because in the beginning, we were just kind of digitally mimicking the physical experience. And you gotta, you realize quickly that digital minutes are different than physical minutes. And how you create for digital, you can't just mimic the physical. It's a different media, a different channel. So creating that for in a digital first environment is something that we did and we learned worked. So we're going to continue doing that as we move into it. With students specifically, we created Zoom small group opportunities for all of our students with their small group and their small group adult leaders or volunteer leaders. I think as we kind of move into this next version of normal, we would like to bring some of that with us. Again, to experience small group as a middle school student, as a junior high student, why would we require that you be in the building every week to do that? So is it possible that we have a small group meeting in a small group room with a TV with a Zoom link in it that 4 of the students can join in digitally while 10 of them are physical? So I think trying to figure out ways to, again, it's not binary, trying to figure out ways for it to be an integrated hybrid solution. So I think we want to try to figure out ways to bring things like that too. That's
great. I mean, Lane, what have you noticed in terms of family ministry across all the locations at North Point? Yeah. How are they shaping it up?
I think they've done some amazing things, especially to pivot on the fly. I mean, that was, very impressive. To me, the thing that I have to always constantly remember for myself is that what seems foreign to me is native to every child and student, in our churches. I mean, they are digital natives. They have not lived life without, one of these things or without, a pad or without something. So what we're like, wow, can they connect this way? Yes, they do all the time. I mean, that's the way. Yeah, they live their life digitally. We see it as a shift. They are just waiting for us to catch up, I think, so I don't think we need to be afraid of, will this work with them? It will. We just need to figure out some of the best ways to do it. I would, and I totally get, we have a completely different opportunity and budget and people involved. So I get that everybody, on the call can't do exactly, some of the things we've done, but I think I would encourage you to look for organizations and curriculum company, people who provide things that are doing this well. Orange is Reggie Joyner. Some of you know him as a good friend. They're doing a great job of adding in and had been even before the pandemic, the digital component of, their connection and the ability to connect. So I think there are options out there at reasonable cost that, can make it, can kind of bring some of this to really churches of all sizes. But I think if we ignore it, we do it at our own peril, because it is the language that everyone under 25 has grown up speaking. And so we've got to figure out.
Yeah, just to your point there, Lane, I'm glad you raised that, really, because everyone who's a partner with the Further Faster Network, a partner with you guys who joins us, we get the Orange subscription as part of our partnership. And so all the churches that are currently partners with us at Further Faster, they've been using all the fantastic material that Orange are putting out, that you guys use as well, which has really increased their ability to connect with families and with children online. So that's been tremendous for us. Let's push into this retain a bit more, Gavin. I'm interested to know, what are the things that you're learning in this season that you're thinking, we can't afford to let go of this when everything changes?
Yeah, let me go through it really quickly for you and just ask some questions at the end. I want to make sure I get it out for you. There's some things we already knew pre-pandemic, right? So it isn't like everything we've learned has been pandemic learning. Like, we knew that the digital experience was kind of the new front door to the church. Virtually no one experiences our church physically as their first experience. So everyone was already engaging digitally first. We already knew that. We knew that our digital and our physical branding and our approach and, kind of who we are in the community needed to be identical, need to look the same. We already knew that there were physical limitations that digital doesn't have. There's only a certain number of seats in the auditorium. You'd imagine how excited like the Apostle Paul would be to tweet to Ephesus, right? Not have to travel. So like, there's just this unbelievable, unlimited opportunity, with digital. So we already knew some of those things. And we also knew that as a church, we had to move away from being building centric or event centric. We had to become more people centric. And digital solutions allow for that to happen at a much better rate. So all those things we kind of knew going in. The pandemic forced us to do some things with it immediately. And, you kind of brought this up earlier, but restriction is really the mother of all invention. And so the restriction of the pandemic forced us to experiment and innovate immediately. And so we began doing some things that we had always wanted to do. I think we learned very quickly, and I mentioned this quickly earlier though, but it's very digital content is not physical content. Digital minutes are not the same. And so the first couple of weeks, we somewhat created a physical church experience and put it on a digital platform. And we watched people, have an hour-long service of which they watched 30 minutes of it. And we began to wonder, that's weird. So we shifted a few weeks in, and all of our churches experimented differently with this just to kind of see what would work. But I mean, I did 3 sermons that were 18 minutes, and I sat behind a desk like, a late night talk show guy. I don't know that it was a good idea. We call everything experiments. So that way, if it fails, you go, well, it's just an experiment. So, experiments aren't supposed to succeed. So that's good. So, but we learned a lot by doing it. We learned that 3-song worship set online is not going to work. So we have moved away from that. We're doing 1, maybe 1.5 max now in all of our services, because digital minutes and digital experiences are different. So we learned some of those things. So last thing we learned before we talk about retain, we learned that in the past we had tethered everything to Sunday morning services. And the pandemic taught us that we can untether from Sunday morning. That church isn't a once a week thing. It should be a daily thing. And that we as the church should lead people to think daily about this, not once a week about this. And so we were maybe trapped a little bit in this, here comes Sunday, let's create for Sunday. And then everything about the week was promoting here comes Sunday. So we learned we got to get out of that rhythm. So now the hard part is that you're trying to measure success in a pandemic, and it's really hard to evaluate what's working and what's not working when everybody is so digitally fatigued. So you're watching digital engagement kind of plummet, but you don't know if it's because you stink or if because everybody is exhausted from digital. And I tend to think it's probably a little more of the second than the first. I think that we've all experienced the fatigue of Zoom and digital meetings, and I think we're just tired of it. And so I don't want to make excuses for lack of IPs and numbers. I think that's more of the issue, though. So with that assumption in mind, some things I think we're going to retain. I think we're going to retain how personal we've made church in the pandemic, how quickly we've responded to things that people are feeling. You know, when everybody was told to shelter in place and there was a lot of fear in those first few weeks or a month, I think accidentally for a week or two went ahead business as usual with our message series. I think we should have immediately stopped it and started talking about the pandemic and fear and what does God say about things like that. I don't think we would do that if we had to do it again. I think we've learned that pivoting immediately to what culture is feeling is what we're called to do. And we're called to speak truth into culture. And I think we would do it immediately. So an example of that, when the racial unrest bubbled up overnight for us, and I'm glad it did, it needed to, we didn't wait until Sunday to address it. We addressed it that day. And we created a Facebook Live event at Woodstock City on a Thursday night that week. We didn't have to wait. And so I think we're going to retain that in the new normal. Daily opportunities to experience church, shorter sermons. I think we're going to push towards that. But not shorter just because we think it's better, but because it makes the whole service better. Because we can spend an hour, of which 40 minutes of it isn't a talking monologue. We can spend more time making it personal and connecting with people. So I think we want to retain that. With children, I won't belabor that again, but we want to retain the digital aspects with our children and with our students. We don't want to jettison that for all physical again. That idea of untethering from Sunday, I think is going to be important. It could be that we could even move Sunday to a different day. I'm not sure yet about that. But, you know, for us, Sunday in the States, at least in the Southeast United States, Sunday is still the day that everybody thinks of being church day. So to get away from that it might not do us any favors right now. I will tell you, though, that we've had conversations on, you know, we already take 2 Sundays off a year. For us, it's the last Sunday in May and the last Sunday of the year in December. We just don't meet as a church. We've had discussions, it's all ideas at this point, but maybe we should take the summer off. Or maybe we should take June off. Physically. And just create digital for that. But strategically, because it's harder to invite people to the church than it is to your house. So what if we created watch parties for people and allowed our attendees to invite people over for Sunday brunch and watch Woodstock City while they're there? You know, so
this is a brilliant idea. I love this because you're giving all your volunteers a break.
Yes.
Giving new energy to when you come back after the summer.
Yes.
And you're creating church in someone's home. Oh
yes.
Man, I've never thought about that. It's a great idea.
Duncan, the
and
word
save a lot of money.
And it's cheap. I mean, the budget, we wouldn't do it for that reason, but it's an ancillary benefit.
No, of course not. Not at all.
So the word scarcity and exclusivity are very important, I think, for us. And when we do something every 7 days, there's nothing exclusive and there's nothing scarce. So by taking a month and a half off or something, it automatically builds that. And by the way, it also gives you a gap to change things again, to reevaluate, to innovate. It's so hard to do that when you only have a 7-day cycle.
And it's not a shock to the system for people who people are now used to church online. So it's not a shock to the system like it would have been pre-pandemic.
Right.
Exactly.
And to be clear, we're just talking about that and thinking 100%. About it. So please no tweets that North Point has decided to take the summer off next year.
No. I bring that up, and I think I said it. It's an idea we're experimenting with.
Oh, I know you did. You said that. I'm underlining it and circling it. Yeah.
So, and the other stuff we've already mentioned, retaining. I mean, you know, why do we have to meet physically for every meeting we have? You know, with all of our volunteers, we want to just check in with them. Why do we have to go to a coffee shop or a pub? We can just Zoom them. I mean, so I think we've realized that it can be very effective. Not as the only tool. It's a little exhausting, but.
So let me just go back to one thing. Chris asks a great question. You talked about these daily opportunities to do church, and for Woodstock to not just be a 1 hour a week church, but a 7-day a week church. What have you been doing specifically around that you think we're gonna keep doing that?
So we created a strategy early on, and we've morphed it as we've gone. We had to course correct but some things that we began doing immediately. I started sending a Monday morning email to our entire church every single week. We've never done that. On Tuesday, so that was our biggest digital investment on Monday. On Tuesday, we had a staff member other than me do a 1 to 3 minute video just celebrating some things that were happening in our community. On Wednesday, we had fun. We made sure that the digital experience was about fun and promoting things in the community, because we want to be for the community, not for our church. And so we celebrated businesses in the community. We encouraged people to do something fun with their family. We gave them some ideas. On Thursday, I did a 1 to 2, 3 minute devotion, a spiritual deposit in the lives of everybody through Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, and YouTube. And then on Friday, we began pointing to things we wanted to talk about over the weekend. Saturday, we encouraged people to engage with us on Sunday and previewed what was going to happen and why they needed to do it. And then Sunday, of course, we did church. So we tried to develop a holistic strategy that didn't just say all week, we're doing a thing, here it comes, Sunday, here it is. We instead tried to make deposits along the way that were still somewhat connected to the meta theme of where we were going, right? But allow people to engage. So really quick, we're thinking about the new normal, Duncan. What if we took the beginning of the week to dive deeper into what we did on Sunday and took the second part of the week to begin to create interest, create tension, bubble up felt needs for what we want to talk about on Sunday? Because I still think Sunday is going to be the best day and the biggest day for us. But I think we can leverage the rest of the week to keep people connected to where we're going and where we went. And I think that'd be a strategy that, we'll play it out a little bit. It may completely fail. It's an experiment, but.
So maybe the 40-minute sermon isn't dead. Maybe you do 20 minutes on Sunday.
Yes.
Yeah. You do 20 minutes on Sunday and you say, there is another part to this. And I'm going to pick it up Tuesday night. If you want to see Instagram Live or on Facebook, exactly. I'm going to pick it up then. And so you keep the connection going. Brett, I love that. It's a great idea.
I recorded a 3 message series on grief and loss, and what do you do when you've lost so many things during the pandemic? How do you not let it wreck you emotionally? So we recorded 3 weeks. One of them is going to be used on Sunday. The other 2 are going to be released digitally on our website and podcast and all that. And I say in part 1, there's a lot more to talk about, but we're going to do that just digitally. Make sure you go watch these other things, and here's what we talk about.
Yeah, that's
so again, we don't have to rely on a service to do those things.
Yeah, I love that. Yeah, rethinking. Listen, we're running really short of time here, guys. I just want to ask one more question of both of you before we rush. We've talked really clearly about stuff we're going to retire, and I love how people have put in the chat some of the things they're thinking about retiring. Yeah. Gavin, your stuff on retention is brilliant, and the way to think about the things we need to retain. I'm just wondering, you're both leaders, and you're both very influential leaders as well. I'm not talking personally. I don't want you to get in, I'm not going to be a therapist for the next couple of minutes, but are you, as a leader, Lane, is there stuff you're thinking of doing differently because of what you've discovered in COVID, stuff that you might want to retire and stuff that you thought, this is good, I'm going to retain this?
Yeah, definitely on some of the practical things we talked about, but I think this is far more the softer side of leadership. One of the things that really impacted my thinking going into this, I'm a big Patrick Lencioni fan, like to read a lot of stuff that he did. And one of the first things he said when this thing hit, somebody asked him in an interview, how does a leader need to pivot in this? And he said, just be human, show up. And so yeah, you're a leader and you're like on to the next thing people who work with me will tell you that is not necessary. I'm a human, but I'm not always the most, humanity type, person. Anyway, so I've really tried to dial up the relational connection, the how are you, what's going on, it's good, and actually people, actually want to be cared for. Who knew? I don't know, so, I do want to retain that. I want to, now, we'll come back in 6 months and we'll find out how well I'm doing. But yeah, I do want to retain the humanity part of what's come out in this.
And has Gavin got your permission to to tell you.
Yes,
when he
Gavin
sees
can come back on here and say he's still just as
Unbelievable.
bitter as he ever was.
Just as alien as he used to be. Well, thanks, Lane. Thanks for the honesty. What about you, Gavin? Is there stuff that you've learned in the season that you're wanting to retain and retire?
Yeah, really quick. You know, I think we have a tendency as leaders to want to know the answers and want to know what to do. And I think we expect everybody who's following us assumes that we're going to know what to do and know how to lead the organization or lead them personally well. I think the most powerful thing that happened for me was at a staff meeting when I just looked at our staff and said, digitally looked at him and said, I don't know how to do this and I don't know what to do. And I'm frustrated by that. And I wish I was better. And I asked them all to forgive me for the mistakes that we were making. And I just didn't know what I was doing. And I'm trying my best to learn, but I just don't know. And the amount of feedback immediately after that meeting, where I think every staff member texted or emailed and said, I feel the same way. Thank you for helping me understand it's okay to not know how to do it. And that you don't have to be perfect to be a leader. And my instinct is to want to come across as if I've got it together. And in the pandemic, it didn't take a brain surgeon to look at me and go, you don't know what you're doing, because nobody does. It's a pandemic. So I think that's something we will take with us into the rest of our leadership here, allowing ourselves to be a lot more honest about what we just don't know and asking for help and not assuming that it's a problem to admit that you're not sure. That's
brilliant. Gentlemen, we could have spoken for 2 hours. There's still so many more questions, so much more, but I know you're busy guys and I really appreciate your time today. Listen, at the end of our last webinar last week, I made the offer that some of the Further Faster team would love to come and hang with your elders, with your staff team, with some of your volunteers, just spend an hour with you talking about your church and maybe about how Further Faster can help you go further faster and reach unchurched people. I was amazed at the uptake on that. We still have a few spots available. So if you would love for us to do that over the next 3 or 4 weeks, then email me. My email address will pop up in the chat. Email me and say, Duncan, I'd love to do that. Tell me what your job role is and tell me what your church website address is. And we'll see if we can find a slot to offer you so that we can come hang with you for an hour and then maybe answer some of the questions you haven't had a chance to ask or get answered today. Listen, thank you for jumping in on this conversation. We really appreciate it. Our YouTube channel is full of lots and lots of other conversations we've had with other people from North Point and beyond that I think you'll find really helpful as you negotiate this pandemic and all that it throws up in your church. So thanks for being with us. And thank you so much, Lane and Gavin, for your time and your wisdom. Really appreciate it. God bless everybody. See ya.
Good day, guys.
Good day.